old-fashioned way where you turn up and meet people in a hygienic way, terms and conditions apply, and then the virtual way that you just saw, and there's pre-recorded as well. So we're trying a hybrid of both. So apologies if there were some glitches, which I suspect there will be, but thank you for your patience. So when you're sitting in this room, just remember there's an audience around the globe who are also watching and actually will be able to share videos afterwards. And there's some really interesting topics. I just want to thank the previous speakers, because I think that principle of health inequalities and benchmarking against outcomes globally is such an important piece of work. And I would strongly recommend, certainly at least as mentioned, having a look at the summary of that report. Building on some of the other areas that we in healthcare systems. So how do you operationalize innovation? How do you deliver some of the areas that have been identified in the report? We've been really fortunate to have a session which is led by McKinsey. So we've got Mitch and Stephanie Mills, who work in the healthcare practice in the London branch of McKinsey. And we've also got a fantastic panel. So we've got Guy Lucky, who works at Manchester Health Innovation. Richard, my handwriting's not great, is it? Samuel from NHSX, Deputy Director of Innovation. And
Kristen Anruffer.
Exactly, there you go. Who works at Cambridge Health Partners. So the idea is that we're looking at different ways in which you can collaborate as organizations to deliver innovation in healthcare. So over to you. There'll be questions, opportunities for questions at the end of the session. So if you save those, then, and if you're watching virtually, then please feel free to message in the buttons on the side. Thanks.
So thank you for those who have just joined us. So my name is Stephanie Mills. I'm a partner in the London office for McKinsey & Company. We're here facilitating a discussion around digital innovation, sort of more broadly. I think on one of the brochures or so, it might sort of say ICS specifically in pathways, but actually this is a much broader conversation around opportunities and challenges within the healthcare system, and where there might be specific, ideas around digital as an unlock. And I guess the common theme as well with our panelists who have just been introduced as well is a very, very strong sort of innovation lens and innovation roles. So we're looking forward to having a good conversation. I'll just spend a couple of minutes as a quick intro. The bulk of this will be a panel discussion. And then, as Tal said, we'll leave 10 minutes at the end for questions from this group, and as well if we're able to do it from the virtual participants. So thank you. Just a couple of words, I think, from most people who are here in the audience, we are operating under an environment that is that's complex, it's changing. We know that the healthcare systems in general face lots of pressures, both on the demand side as well, in terms of kind of supply and are able to service. So, a lot of the context or the setting for this conference in the next couple of days is very much around what can we do, or where are some of the unlocks for digital to help in, most importantly, improving clinical outcomes, but also, understanding what this means in terms of kind of efficiencies, opportunity areas, solutions, as we kind of enter, new ways of working. Against this backdrop, and probably most notably this week for many of us who've chosen to come here face to face, we know that COVID has been one of the key accelerators on many, many levels in terms of innovation and, for digital and data and different means. Just an overview in terms of, different lenses within healthcare systems and some of the things that we're seeing. But this is kind of most prevalent, in terms of the adoption of digital. In some ways, we sort of see it in healthcare delivery on a day-to-day side of things, where remote monitoring and, virtual sort of health has come to the fore. But we also sort of see it, across the board in things earlier on in faster regulatory cycles, faster approvals, changing of policy, and really sort of starting to streamline data and efficiencies in the system. So hopefully some of these things, ring true. And this conference, is a fantastic sort of opportunity where we really get the opportunity to think more broadly around where the sort of next innovation might come from. And so here are just some of the examples, of things that we've seen to date. But really what we want to do is to open the floor and sort of think a little bit more blue sky, around where future unlocks might be. So the three questions that we were going to be talking about today really are around, first one, what are the challenges that are facing healthcare systems overall? And, looking both within this country, but also outside of the UK, for examples and really understanding what those are. Secondly, if there are solutions and ideas as opportunities to address some of these challenges, again, sort of going into that and probing a little bit what those could look like. And then lastly, really around this collaboration theme, where as we sort of think about the ecosystems and partnerships, could better collaborations further developments in the area? So I will leave this slide as a bit of a backdrop. Mitch, my colleague from McKinsey, will be facilitating the discussion, but please, keep a note of things that you would like to ask. And again, we'll come back to that at the end. And thank you.
Can you all hear me? Good. I think this is coming through in the mic. I haven't tested. So thanks, Stephanie. So I think it's really clear that there's a lot of exciting innovation to consider. And just looking around this conference, there's tons of really interesting stands and lots of opportunities to kind of explore new technologies. However, I'd like to start the conversation on some of the challenges to give us a good grounding in what are the kind of issues and topics that are really most concerning our panelists on stage. So for the first question, I'll kind of actually ask each of you individually a specific question on this topic. And then as the conversation evolves, please do feel free to bounce off each other and keep it organic. I have a load of questions here, but better if it's not a whole script. So, Guy, the unenviable task. You're the Digital Innovation Director for Health Innovation Manchester. So you have extensive experience working with stakeholders from the front line to CIOs. From your perspective, what do you see as the key challenges at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think, if you sort of contextualize some of the challenges we have, they are, the elective backlog challenge caused as a result of COVID and procedures and operations that were sort of put on the back burner as a result of treating COVID patients. That's a massive issue for us. Like most places, Greater Manchester has a diverse population with a variety of just health and social care needs. We've got below life expectancy for both men and women. We've got children that are disadvantaged from birth, and we've got an aging population, which is a real challenge. And the Marmot report, in terms of this, just been issued around the difference in inequalities between health outcomes, especially between people that are more wealthy and people that are less wealthy, is startling. So one of the key figures is that you're 2.3 times more likely to die from COVID if you're from a poorer background. So there's some huge challenges in terms of equality. I think in terms of addressing that in the broadest context, health has a place to play in that, but it must be supplemented with a much broader transformational agenda around public service transformation. So what I mean by that is that the root cause of some of the challenges in health are directly related to the economy, and that's why GM was one of the first devoluted cities where the budget of health and social care is given to Greater Manchester, so we can actually start to generate that money in terms of better jobs, better education and better housing. So I think in terms of the challenges, one of them is how the NHS fits within the broader public sector transformation, specifically around the industry strategy. And I think digital's got a real place to play, especially around job creation. In GM alone, we have 10,000 open vacancies for digital and AI individuals. So it's a real skills gap. There is a key push around the life science vision and industry, if those are familiar with the strategy around that, which is the UK is actually being seen as a driving force around pharmaceutical and drugs, to be able to generate both economic growth and also to generate new and innovative interventions for our population. There's a big agenda around clinical research and doing the clinical research in actual communities, rather than very sort of specific groups that have been a challenge before. And the final point is the transition from individual organisational ownerships to integrated care systems, which is an interesting dynamic that we're going through at the moment. GM, luckily, we're quite advanced in that sort of space, but it does beg the challenge around what does integrated care systems mean? It means integrated delivery. So it's not within an organization, it's integrated delivery across the whole of the ecosystem, both primary care, secondary care, and specialist care. And that brings with it some really interesting challenges around sovereignty of power and the sovereignty of delivery, organizations versus ICS. Within that context, as it relates to sort of digital, so I come from industry. I spent most of my life working for a large tech company, and some of the challenges that I now experience when I'm now in the NHS, we've got more tech than you can shake a stick out. We've got loads of capability. The challenge is how you land that technology into a transformed operating model. So I spend probably 95% of my time not in technology, but really thinking through how do we enable the clinical and operated delivery model in an integrated way. And I've got 2 lessons in my life: focus on the problem, not the tech, and the solutions that problem involves people, process, and cultural change. If you spend £1 on the tech, we should be spending £3 on the people, process, and cultural change.
Very interesting. Richard, you're at NHSX. Nationally, what does the picture look like for you? What are your innovation priorities?
So we are experiencing the same sort of global trends that everyone does, and top of that list is people and the workforce in order to sustain the provision and planning of care, which I suspect everyone out here is experiencing the same challenges, be it in health or social care or in the third sector. So people is driving an awful lot of how we think about how technology is going to ameliorate those challenges. We simply can't recruit the people that we used to back in, again, I'm too old these days, but across every sector, we used to think that there was a recruitment solution that would ameliorate the issue we faced. And that no longer exists, because the competition for people, trained and untrained, is becoming hugely extreme. And therefore, I think from a national perspective, we are looking at encouraging and creating an environment where solutions can drive both freeing up individuals trained and untrained from avoidable activities to focus on face-to-face care, and we would use that to drive sort of productivity and efficiency, be that robotic process automation through to AI to assist clinicians in being more focused on where they add the greatest value. We also have to and are beginning to look at alternatives to physical capacity. So how do we create a capacity in a virtual way? So in this instance, virtual wards, remote monitoring, and we're seeing some extraordinary interface of people's experiences and how they value being supported and cared for professionally and safely in a home setting through virtual wards enabled by technology, as opposed to a traditional inpatient treatment model. And then thirdly, and probably most importantly, is the idea of empowerment and guiding and supporting an individual through a pathway of care, through equipping them with smart technologies and solutions and information in an easy and timely fashion to help them optimize their experience of care and ultimately lead to improved outcomes of services. And the kind of one addendum to that, going back to Guy's central point on this, is that technology is not an end in itself. Technology is an enabler, and the one fundamental message we can never forget is that technology cannot increase the care gap. It can't exacerbate the inequalities that people are experiencing today. It has to be the driver to narrowing the care gap, and if we ever forget that, we use technology to build that divide, then we've ill-served the population in which to whom we report.
Very interesting. Thanks, Richard. Kristen Ann, does this resonate? So from Guy, we heard a lot about, there's challenges from like public sector transformation. We hear a lot about, the integration of the industrial strategy, how these things vary. Similar themes emerge from the national perspective. In your role in Cambridge, how does this change, or does it resonate, or how do you see it?
No, I mean, I would pick up on that theme of outcomes. And a real focus on the outcome rather than the digital tech. And I learned this actually when I was working at NHS Digital. Sometimes we measured deployment, occasionally we measured usage, but you never actually measured what you were trying to change, whether that was a reduction in pressure ulcers or more capacity on the GP. And actually, we celebrated some successes where actually we haven't had any impact on the outcome. And if you're not focused on that outcome, either for the patient or the clinician, then you're not going to be able to do what you did, which is focus on the pathway change and things like that. You've got to think about this as a change management journey. And that's where I think technology has really failed within the NHS up until this point, because it's been viewed as technology. It's been viewed as over there, whether we've had NHS Digital over there or the IT department. It's not being viewed as a change management enabled by digital. And that's sort of fundamentally turning it on its head. It also really helps with the communication of it, because then people can get excited. They're doctors and finance, whoever in the NHS is motivated by helping the patient in front of them or their own lives becoming easier. So if you talk about, well, I'm going to give you more time, I don't meet anybody within the health system in my daily life who doesn't have frustrations or say actually that their day is not full of things that could be done better and smoother, all of which have technology solutions. And put in that way, I'm going to take away your frustrations. That's very different to have this digital solution. So I think that very much resonates with what you've both said. I think the second thing that I see and why some people do it better than is you do have to have a conviction that digital and technology can help, because it does take investment up front. And you've got to have positivity around that. So you've got to have systems that actually believe that it is worth making sure they've got the capacity, that they hire the talents, that they invest for a couple of years. They do, and in doing so, don't hire the extra nurse or don't hire the extra, put on the extra ambulance. And that takes quite a lot of conviction and leadership and the need to tell that story. And that's what I really see in the difference. We want systems that are succeeding versus those that are struggling. You've got to have that conviction and positivity that it will work. I was down in, I feel sometimes in the NHS, we think, well, actually, it's so hard and we're in such a difficult position and got such a long elective backlog and various things. There isn't sort of hope and various things. And actually, we've got a fabulous health system with some of the best outcomes for the funding that's available here. We've done amazing things, whether that's COVID. During COVID, I remember standing up a panel around oxygen monitoring with people in Germany and France and the UK. And actually, we were miles ahead of other places in doing it. So actually, I think a sense of conviction that it will help and confidence that we can do it with a focus on outcomes.
Great, thanks, Kristen. So I think what we're hearing there is there's focus on outcomes. So it's not just the tech. There's an emphasis on skills and people, and then there's conviction on the investment behind digital. Guy, just to go back to your point on skills and people, could you expand on that a little bit more? When you say there's, you'd invest £3 for every £3 for every pound invested on tech, you'd invest in people. Say more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes back to the points both Richard and Kristen have made, really, which is that from a technology perspective, if you're going to spend, let's just take electronic patient records as an example, and that's part of getting your basics right in terms of the people that have read Smart Foundations in the NHS. You need to be able to have an electronic patient record. I've seen through my career electronic patient records being delivered successfully and not successfully. And the key element really is, as Kristen says, this is a change journey. So how are we engaging the staff in co-creation of how they're going to work differently as a result of that sort of technology. How are we going to create clinical and operational sponsors for that activity? How do we then deploy it at scale? But based on deploying at scale, how do we show lighthouse capability that enables us to give to Richard's point, the evidence of success? And that requires sort of a whole sort of transformational infrastructure that wraps around the technology deployment. I think the other key thing is that I think I can say this coming from a tech perspective, that there's something around shared language. So my father's Italian. I don't speak Italian, which is poor. But I'd liken that if clinicians speak English, then digital people speak Italian, and there needs to be an element of shared language between those groups. So I've learned a lot from both clinical and operational staff, and I think there's something around that coming together from a clinical and operational staff learning a modicum around the digital space. What that takes, as Christian says, is a commitment from those organisations to invest in those elements. But I think that the payback is enormous. So yeah, I mean, to me, it's really around the transformational change wrap that really makes anything successful. And as I say, just anecdotally, I spend literally 90% of my time looking at the people and process operating model change. And I think that the problem is there's a tendency, both from clinicians and technical teams, to focus on products and solutions, not what is the biggest problem they're trying to fix. So my big key recommendation is always focus on the problem. If you don't know how to articulate what the problem is, then when you put a lap in place, that's not going to solve that particular problem. So focus on the problem. The other big challenge is, what is the biggest lever that you can actually pull to address that problem? And this requires some sort of deep thought and analysis, because lots of things you can do. There's only a certain amount of investment going around. So how do you pick the biggest bets and wins, which means that you really need to truly understand the problem and the pain points that currently exist before you start looking at the technology.
And then as you implement, I'd say keep measuring.
Absolutely.
Are you having a difference on that problem?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And are you feeding back? Because I think that's another thing we tend to do. And I think sometimes why clinicians are so resistant to change, we sort of say, you're going to do this big change.
Yeah.
And they have to then, they evaluate it, they push back against it, they say it's not right, not enough data, as opposed to saying, we're going to try something to fix this problem. And if it doesn't fix it, we'll change it, or we'll go back, or we'll stop, or we'll take it back. And I think that's actually something we also need to, we need to keep measuring whether we're actually having a difference to the problem, and if not, be prepared to go back again.
Fascinating. Richard, from a national perspective again, so Guy gave a really good example about implementation of EPRs and how it's dependent on kind of addressing the problem and as opposed to leading with the app. Have you any perspective how these priorities are shifting for NHSX, and what are the kinds of things that you're seeing are working well in this space?
So I'm going to be really dull for you out here, because there's a kind of kindred spirit on the table here, which is this all comes down to implementation and delivery and impact. And wandering around outside today, there's no end of extraordinary tech solutions for more or less any challenge that you might want to encounter. No doubt whatsoever. But actually, everything does boil down to kind of 3 points of philosophy. It's kind of Guy's 3 points. I'll call it. I remember meeting a BT futurologist who talked about easy being the watchword that we now work on. And if it's not easy, then people will either disengage or circumvent those solutions. So easy becomes the driver for how we believe that technology has to seamlessly fit into the patient or the person's experience of their interface with health and care, and the clinician's experience of how they deliver health and care. And I guess if there's one message to take away from today, if it ain't easy, and if it isn't intuitive, and if it isn't hooked into the pathway or the experience of the user, then inevitably it's a limitation on that technology. And that's something that we probably haven't spent enough time on, rather than looking at the technical specifications of the solution, than its interface with its users. And I guess that's something that we need to work harder on nationally and regionally and locally. And I'll wear my hat as a director of digital insight and innovation in an ICS, is that how do we really evaluate that easy element as opposed to the technical specifications? I guess the second piece that I would reflect on from a kind of national perspective is, how do we hook up research and development and production? So I think in the NHS in my days, there's been this glorious research and innovation sector over there, fueled by tech and academia, and over here there's coups who are running the production cycle, and really struggling with these pressures and problems and challenges, and never the twain shall meet. They'll success for an academia is publishing a research paper. Success for a coup is to get through the night of delivery. And actually, we need to create an infinity loop between our research and innovation functions, and the problem solving. So go to Go's point, what's the problem? How do we solve it? How do we hook up this extraordinary capability? And that moves us from a specification sale relationship to a co-production. What's the challenge we're trying to solve? How do we create joint solutions, and how do we drive sustainability? And I'll talk in a little bit about that co-production methodology. But the other point, and I'm sorry, I'm just saying the same things less eloquently the guy, but I was blown away by design thinking as a philosophy of implementation, as opposed to the traditional structured kind of Prince 2 methodology. I know where I'm going. I bought my product. I'm just going to rigorously implement it, irrespective of whether it's painful or easy for people. I'm just going to get through it. And at the end of it, I'll shut the machine down, and hey presto, there is an app on a desktop somewhere that a clinician may or may not access. Who knows? Almost who cares? And the answer is that design thinking is driven by iterate. Your first solution will not work. Your second and third and fourth solution might work, as long as you are delighting the user and you are understanding the pain they experience. And the iceberg philosophy will be that 10% of our energy is spent on finding the right partnership, finding the right solution, and 90% of our energy is spent on design thinking, that iteration, that embeddedness, that benefits realization, which is something that I would, not from an X perspective, but from our local perspective, has been one of our limitations. In the NHS, we do not do design thinking, we do not do implementation, and we do not do benefits realization of our technological installations. And that diminishes us. So the next time we come to the board table to say we want to spend another £1 million on our technology solution, people will point to the frustrations that they experience on previous cycles. So get it right, do it well, design it iteratively with our users, clinicians, and people in the heart of it. Then I think we move forward in a really positive way.
It's interesting, just picking up on that, because I love this cycle, because I'm in Cambridge. I'm surrounded by fabulous innovations or academics. You know, what Turing Institute, I've got the Cambridge Centre for Artificial Intelligence in Medicine, etc. I have Fiona Gilbert, who's just done federated learning across 20 hospitals to show that with the NVIDIA supercomputer you can predict oxygen needs, etc. And none of those things land in our hospital. And I think what I'm coming to, and I'm spending an awful lot of time at the moment thinking about that adoption challenge, both to get those very smart people focused on the problems, and then secondly, then to how do we, and I'm interested in your views about whether it's the same skill set though, because I don't think those people are then interested. Does that make sense? They've cracked the problem, they've solved it, they've got a solution. So I think it's a different, I think it either needs to be the NHS who's better at absorbing it, or to your point, there needs to be some translation or between the two. And it's a bit like, I mean, I see the same in life sciences. We've got a lot of scientists who actually work out the structure of the DNA or how to do the mRNA vaccine. When they spin out a company, they are not the leaders. You hire a CEO and a marketing director and things to take it to impact and market. So I think actually we've got to think quite carefully about that cycle and how we engineer it actually, because the gap's very big at the moment.
So
do you mind if I go? So yeah, absolutely. And I think one of Health Innovation Manchester, its purpose is to be at that nexus between discovery of new molecule development all the way through to delivery to frontline staff, and how you engage an ecosystem of both academia, industry, and providers through that. One of the things I've certainly learned on my journey through that process is, you're right, people are, culturally, those are very different sort of worlds. How do you knit them together? So one thing that we've done is we've come up with an innovation pipeline, which is a sort of structured process that enables us to understand in a very gated way where we are with innovation. So we understand, in a very digital way, what are the key research themes that have been done across all our 4 great universities. How do they map onto our sort of clinical need and our disease area need? So now we've got a very structured process to understand the horizon scanning, and then we go through which of those are ready for translation into frontline service. And then in translation, absolutely the key thing is fast fail, and being the ability to take things very quickly and see if it works or not. And I think one of the cultural sort of shifts, I think, is actually us being comfortable with the ability to fail. and being accepted of that, I think is fundamental. We've done some, great work around glycerin. If you're probably aware, with Jim was the first place to do proof of value around glycerin, and glycerin's the next cholesterol, so it's intervention. So it's a 6 months drug you have rather than taking statins. We've worked, hand in hand with Novartis from a research perspective, with our academic health science networks across the UK, to be able to actually deploy that in its initial guise within a locality within Greater Manchester. That the trial evidence has been fantastic, and then we're going to be rolling that across both in GM and across nationally. So there is a way of doing that, but you're right, it's recognizing that people have different interests across that continuum. We go from overall horizon scanning to what we call in qualification, from qualification into solutioning. When we talk about solutioning, it's the business process and cultural wrap in terms of truly understand the problems you're trying to solve, and then into proof of value, so deploy it in live into the wild, and then understanding whether that's been successful, then rolling out at scale either across Greater Manchester or across the NHS through the academic health science network. And having that sort of view of the pipeline and understanding what skills you need has been incredibly helpful for us to sort of manage that sort of implementation of the infinity loop.
Thanks, Guy. Kristen Ann, I'd love to pick back on the point that Richard made about, we have R&D to production. Like I was saying, there's a whole spectrum, and there's the innovators with the great idea, and you have the CEOs trying to get through the night from that kind of spectrum of ideas. This conference is primarily geared towards like the innovators and the people with the great ideas. So in your role in an academic health science kind of network type place, what advice would you have for the people with the great idea who are trying to bridge that gap? It's quite a gap to go from a great idea to something on the front line. How could people think about that better?
Come back to focus, start with the problem, know what problem you're trying to solve, for whom. I think then, secondly, just recognize the system you're working in and work at its pace, and understand. I think too often people get, it is hard. General practices spend 80% of their time in front of patients and probably less than 10% of the time on management and running. That's very different from a company organization. So think about how you are interacting with that health system, how you set up your meeting, quite sensitive to how you set up your meetings, the timeframes you expect in terms of reactions and things. So adapt your own style to that of your receiving organization. My third thing would probably be, as well as talking about the problem, you probably actually have to get, not only do we have, I think in the NHS, a culture of not wanting to fail, we also have a sort of a very odd perception of risk. So things that are going to be implemented are absolutely evaluated for every possible risk that could happen when that thing gets implemented or your technology gets implemented. But you don't think about the risk of doing nothing and standing still. And therefore, bringing out to your customers or your people you're engaging with the real problem and the problem they've got and the risks that they're bearing, and actually therefore how what you're suggesting isn't such a difficult thing. I think that's something and the NHS is very bad at, and therefore helping to do that. And then I would think it's thirdly, I'd suggest find people. So just as people are key to the change management, I think people are key. The person who's going to champion this and work with you on it, who's sympathetic, who understands it, who's within the system, is again probably key. It's still a relationship type of game. And then just keep your eye all the time, finally, and it's about the people, on is value being fairly distributed? You have to realize value, you have to get money, you have to be able to innovate in various things, but is the system seeing value and being able to realize that? And are you helping them do that? I mean, I was always very struck actually by, I can't remember what it was, but patients, doctor, a patient about some booking app, that actually they focused in the first year on the money saved on stamps, although the benefit was really much bigger than that, because actually that was a real tangible benefit that could be banked, could be understood, and various things. So always think about how you're allowing your customer to release value over time and build that trust.
Do you want to jump in, Richard?
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. being part of a national process of deploying technology as opposed to a local process of deploying technology. And the 2 or 3 areas, well, one was that the battle one had to fight at a local level to both demonstrate the impact in evidence and then to win the hearts and minds. So beds and heads still win out in frontline, no doubt. Wherever you are, beds and heads are tangible. I can look at them, and tech solutions are well regarded, but seen on the same plateau as beds and heads. So in order to do that, the evidence base and the impact of the benefits associated with a deployment is key. If you're in the tech sector, that's the first number you need to know is what are the benefits that you can realize, and how can I evidence them in real world application? The same way that pharma wouldn't walk into the door with a new drug and not demonstrate the quantifiable benefits, tech has to really know and put a real world behind it. And in health, we're beginning at the foothills of connected data, which gives us PHM, which allows us to track the experience of an individual through a healthcare system, as opposed to sequences of interaction between a cardiologist and a patient and a patient with COPD and a clinician. But on the top of that, we need to layer actuarial modeling so that we are genuinely able to see the cost as well as the outcome experience of the application of technology on a journey of an individual over the year or 2 or 3 years. And that's always eluded us in the tech sector in terms of being able to bridge that beds and heads. So if I can evidence the application of technology has supported a reduction in cost and improvement in outcome for a person, that's the kind of the magic win. Then I think we can work it up until that point where we've got that alignment of understanding of patient experience, cost and outcome. Then we will always struggle to win hearts and minds. So the faster the NHS can fast track that insight, the better. And I guess the other piece to both is so important. We say it 3 times. If you're in tech, the investment comes after the sale has been secured to co-produce the benefit. If you're in health, the win comes in not getting the widget on the laptop or the computer, but in getting the clinicians owning and valuing the asset. So that we've just deployed 250 million pounds worth of capital out into the system in tech to support elective recovery. We've been constantly encouraging people where you can to capitalize that money on implementation support to bring that asset to use. And there's no limit on that, but as a minimum, we've been encouraging 20% as a minimum of the licensing, as a minimum. And yet when we look at it, I suspect we'll see it'll be a band 7 part-time deployment solution, massively understated versus the licenses. And almost as a tech company, I'd be saying, I want to understand your implementation solution, because if you're not going to implement my solution, that reflects poorly on me. And actually my real world evidence is diminished. So I think that's that co-production that health and tech genuinely have to get to. We all win where we co-produce and we see a sustainable benefit realizing relationship. We lose if tech takes money early and we have a suboptimal implementation, and health sinks back because we lose scar tissue, that the next time we come for an implementation, we're going, well, that one really wasn't loved. So
Mitch, do you mind if I
absolutely?
So I suppose I've lived on both sides of the fence. So from a technology perspective, how to land solutions into the NHS, and I suppose I think I've learnt more in the last 2.5 years being in the NHS, being on that side around some of the complexity of landing technology, and it starts with actually understanding who you're selling to. So traditionally in a tech sale, you say that you sell to the CIO. Then there's the conversation. The CIO then has to sell to the director of finance.
Could you give us an example, Guy, to make this real? Like what would be an example of one of these innovations that has come from that trajectory?
Well, so if you think about the National Programme of IT, I was the Chief Technology Officer before everybody shouts for CSC on that particular programme, and this is where I learned a lot of my lessons, which is focused on the people, not the technology, around sort of that sort of delivery. But a lot of our engagement was with the CIO community, and and when you look at that community, most of their brain space is operating in terms of the business as usual, keeping the lights on and making sure that the chief operating officer is not screaming at them. Number one. Number two then is, how do you engage the clinical community? Because you need both clinical buy-in and digital buy-in. So who is your clinical sponsor through that process? And this is what we didn't particularly do well in the national program of IT, because actually all the targeting money was targeted on license. It was not targeted on actually engagement and delivery. So understanding your clinical sponsor. The next element is understanding your operational sponsor. So, the coup, and your finance sponsor. So, I live and breathe this on a daily basis, thinking how, even though GM is one of the most connected places across the country from an ICS perspective, for me to land a digital solution within Greater Manchester, then I have to get digital sign-off, finance sign-off, operational sign-off, and clinical sign-off. So, then you go, okay, so as third-party organisations, how do you land that? I think the key thing is try and use some of the structures that are in place to help. So the academic health science networks and centres, so myself and Chris and I are part of both. Health Innovation Manchester is one of those. There's 15 across the country. Their job is to help land solutions into the NHS to help you navigate that complexity. So there's something around understanding that complexity. But, I think it comes down to some basic sort of business principles. You would need a compelling value proposition that speaks to different audiences. The sell to a digital CIO is different to the clinical sell, that's different to the COO sell, that's different to the finance sell, and you need to be clear about who you're actually targeting through that process. So I think, hopefully that gives you some experience, but it's not easy and it's complex. So, but there is structures out there that enable you to make that then sort of slightly easier.
But I would also know one thing you didn't mention, and I actually have a little bit of hope for this for the future, is actually the consumer / the patient. And I know that's at the heart of it, and then all docs said that's at the heart of it actually. But I think particularly with technology, I think we're not going to go backwards now that people can book online and have remote digital technology. So thinking about that journey to the end consumer. And if you think about other industries, it's actually been driven by consumer choice and preference. Now that's hard with health because we have someone else who buys for us and things like that. But I think thinking about actually how to really benefit that end patient, how to get it into the hands of the patient. At the end of the day, one of my biggest hopes for digital technology is it does democratize health, because actually the one thing we can't deal with the elective backlogs, we cannot deal with it with the staff and the thing. We have to actually get the patients doing things for themselves. ISEO Health, mental health app that is just really taking off at the moment, because actually it helps people manage and treat their own mental health. And we just never, the one thing that might come out of COVID is that we can't deal with the health problem we have in front of us by doing what we've done for the last however many years efficiently and I think the way to do that, and as technology, is how do we think about products and technologies and digitals that actually do work for that patient.
Controversial though, because you're right. I was wrapping the actual people within the concept.
I was building on what you said.
No, but you're right, because it's right, your language, which is, where is the patient representative voice at the board structure within a health ICS? And the answer is, it's currently not. There is clinical, operational, and digital. Where is the patient and the people represented in that? And I think what we'll start to see as part of population health management is a lot more structural representation. But you're right, it's a good call. Actually, people should be the essence of what we do. But trying to land that when you're a seller into a solution, with the answering the question is, you land it to the finance, the COO, the digital, and the clinical, and those need to represent the people view. But there isn't a structural construct that I see that's represent the people in that sort of debate. Yeah, absolutely agree.
And is there that other recognition that we consumers will tolerate dysfunctionality for a period of time and then we'll switch off? And we talked a little bit earlier before about the importance of how we make it easy for people to interact. And if I've got COPD and I've got and I've also got some ongoing heart failure issues. I'm not going to want to dip into 3 or 4 or 5 different solutions. One for my COVID pass, one for my my COPD, in my COPD support tool, one for my cardiology support tool, one for my GP, one for my so the tolerance of service users, of people we serve, to engage with multiple complex interfaces is going to be very, very limited. And I think that therefore systems need to start thinking about simple aggregation entry points. Tech suppliers need to think about how they dock their solutions into single entry points or portals, be it through the NHS app or through patient engagement portals or through solutions. And that's going to be the key. I think marketing standalone entry points for disease specific solutions. I wear not my NHSX hat, I wear my old hat.
Yeah.
I suspect that will become a challenging sell in future as people expect to be able to access solutions through a one portal route.
I think it's incredibly important. The patient experience, I think, is going to be a dominator, or it should be a dominating theme for what we should be thinking about, now in the next sort of 5 years. I think there's some interesting dynamics. So we're all unwilling buyers of healthcare, in the sense that we don't want to be ill. So therefore, it's not something you're buying from Amazon and you're going, I'd like, to get that. So there's that sort of barrier. So you have to make it really super easy and engaging to be able to engage at pace and scale. I think there's a lot to learn from the gaming industry. I think in terms of how we incentivize. I think there's a lot to learn from digital marketing in terms of how we actually do nudges and creation of social networks around specific areas. Because and sure as eggs, that's a very complex sort of environment to be. But almost we need to provide the capability via social media that enables it to be sort of energized and sort of run and operate itself. The moment we say thou shall use this app, then it's a real challenge. I mean, the NHS app, I think, has been incredibly successful. What you've seen is driven that is, let's cut to the chase, is the COVID pass that enables you to go, which has been fantastic. It's certainly enabling us from GM to go, actually, let's not build another app. Let's lock onto the NHS app for that, which I think is incredibly powerful. But I think patient experience, using social media to engage communities and connectivity, and the way you do nudge marketing are sort of the key elements that are untapped and the sort of a major focus. I think we're still sort of at the early sort of foothills of at the moment. You're right, Richard. If you've got those conditions in Greater Manchester, you'll have 5 different apps, and the people that have got those conditions aren't used to using that technology. So what's the help? The chance of them engaging with sustainability? The answer is probably very little.
It's just a final observation, really, and it tickled me a little bit as I sat in a queue outside this morning, and I was wondering why there was a queue. I got here quite promptly, and the queue was generated by people having to show their COVID app. You probably and I thought, this is some of the most technically enabled people on the planet. And I was sat in the queue and I was hearing them muttering, going, "Oh, I don't know how to find it. Where is it?" And then when we got to the front of the queue, we got in and there was somebody looking at it rather than it being a kind of automated cycle. So technology, which was, let's celebrate this extraordinary achievement of creating a national app which allows you to carry your COVID status and dynamically update your booster if you've had it, and we're suddenly diminished by the fact that we had a manual process which counteracted all that extraordinary innovation. And that felt for me a bit like a vignette of how sometimes poor tech implementation, it becomes counterproductive. We could have thought of a process which embraced the technology. Instead, we deployed technology in a way which actually created queues and frustration and didn't delight the user. It frustrated the user. So a great example there of practice. And those who in virtual world, you bypassed all of that. So well done. But for those of us who didn't, we experienced it raw and tooth and claw.
Very good. So look, conscious of time, I would love to leave some time for questions from the group here, but would love to also ask our excellent panelists one question to land. Where would you like us to be in 2030 in terms of healthcare innovation? Richard, would you like to start?
Where would we like to be by 2030? I think I would genuinely like the technology to be almost hidden, that it becomes normalized around how individuals navigate their journey through a health and care system, which is proactive, which is able to reach out and tackle the kind of care gap where individuals who aren't where we experience digital inequalities are supported by a myriad of different kind of social solutions, being the growth of libraries, the growth of kind of outreach support, but technology not being as overtly front and center, but seamlessly interweaved with the way in which proactive care is supporting people living their lives at home, in the community, avoiding exacerbation where possible and necessary. For me, that's the panacea is technologically enabled care, as opposed to technology clunkily interspersed in points of access to care.
Are you confident we'll get there?
I beg pardon?
Are you confident that will be realized in 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I in amongst what has been one of the most extraordinary, challenging and tragic experiences we've all faced, we have to also acknowledge the pace that COVID has generated around how we're seamlessly connecting digital solutions to the pathway of care. And I guess for many of us, the challenge is don't slow down, don't regress, don't step back, but just do better, learn, iterate, and putting design thinking and deployment, next gen deployment methodologies in play is the way we'll get there.
Kristina, building on.
I think realistically, I'd like to see much more made of connectivity, the power that digital either connects people, it automates things, or it gives you data. And I think the aspect we've really underplayed is connectivity, particularly in this levelling up agenda. So I look at my ecosystem and the campus that I represent in the centre of Cambridge versus Great Yarmouth and the communities, etc. I think that's been something that's been really underexploited, whether that's running, you can run ICU beds now as a single standalone ICU bed in the middle of nowhere with the right support. You can offer the same stroke services that you get in a central. So I really like to see us make more of connectivity, so that actually wherever you live, you can get the same access to healthcare systems, and secondly, you don't have to travel so much. I think there's a huge opportunity there. I think if I was to dream and to have something that I think would radically change, I would love to flip this whole system of record to the patient, and so that you really do put the patient at the heart of the care continuum, and that you manage data, you manage the care pathways, you manage the outcomes at that individual level. And I think that would then really encourage us to integrate care. It would also focus the industry on a consumer who they can love to please, as opposed to this complex system, and you get a lot more innovation.
Thank you. Guy, same question for you.
Yeah. I think my two panelists have some sort of, I think, creating a great experience for the person, and through digital enabling you to provide a very personalized experience that gets you the care you need at the time that you need it and in a place that you want it. I think that's going to be fundamental, and I think digital's got the real power to be able to aggregate those services in a way that can make that happen. There's a lot of challenge in making that happen, because you're talking about service redesign and wrapping services around people, which can be a real challenge. But I think that's the challenge of the ICSs in terms of what needs to sort of be done next. I think there's lots of opportunity around, there's lots of talk around population health management. To me, that has got lots of unlock in terms of value. The key thing is how you drive insight into action, and fundamentally the key pivot is, I think we all understand, we've all got quite sophisticated, certainly having GM, a very rich population health management system. We get great insights, then we go, okay, how are we going to enact that insight? And the enactment of the insight requires you to change how you deliver the service, and also requires you to change how you commission the service. So there's something around flexible commissioning models that enable you to support a reimagined service model that wraps around the patient.
Thanks, Guy. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah. We've got a few minutes, but I'm conscious that there are people from at home or remotely at work. Feel free to send us any questions that you have. Meanwhile, if anyone's got any questions here, we'll need to make sure that it's on audio so that other people at home can hear it. Can I kick off with something actually? I'll tell you what, I find that a really interesting conversation, but the idea of how do you reconcile clinical practice and theory, innovation. So I work in a GP practice, and we copied something that Google does, which puts people into little groups. So we've got 5 innovation groups, and you're not going to magically find some innovation people or AI experts, but you can get people who have an interest in healthcare and have delivered clinical care. So this is there's somebody called Professor McKinsey, who's a professor of strategy at London Business School. He's one of my professors, and really quite a simple strategy. So who, what, and how. So the who is absolutely health inequalities for us as a practice. So we used Professor Marmot's report, divided everybody into 5 groups. So they all looked at each of those different areas. It's really interesting. It's a different way of looking at things. And actually, that prevention model reduced demand. We've done some work on that before. So working on prevention definitely reduced demand. And actually, people say, oh, I haven't got time for that. Well, you haven't got time not to do that, actually, because you can't cope with current demand. What is, we're using social media, and we're using, so only 15% of patients use healthcare apps, 80% use social media. So why don't we use the same language as they use, connect with patients directly, don't worry about the tech, there's no technology there at all. And the how is what we found is that when you put people in little groups to tackle those problems themselves, it works. And we're working with Imperial College for the research piece. Suddenly, everyone's happier. I just wonder if we could encourage more healthcare and create the environment to allow that sort of innovation to happen.
Who would like to go? Christian?
I absolutely agree. And I think it's then also really keen for the adoption. I think, though, it needs to be balanced sometimes with the actual, this whole, how you scale it and how you don't reinvent the wheel 100 times over. So that's the only thing. Because I think there's different types of problems. There are some problems out there, either because they're localized to you, that are genuinely intractable, and it's not a solution. You have to problem solve them up. But I think actually also there is an NHS, why I welcome Richard's role, is there's some things we just know work. And we should actually just support people rolling out that innovation. And that's where I think the HSNs come in and things. And we don't do enough of that, which is why we've slowed down. I just think so. It's a fine balance. I think it's a fabulous tool, both to get that creativity and also to get that buy-in. But I think we also need to balance it by being, take the advantage of having an NHS, take the advantage of the HSNs, and say, actually, let's just do some things we know are right.
Absolutely. And so I absolutely agree. It's what happens at the neighbourhood level. So just my experience in Greater Manchester. So we think in neighbourhoods, people at sort of the PCN, 50,000 people. Localities 250,000, the whole of Greater Manchester's 3 million people. So actually 90% of the care, your day-to-day interaction happens at the neighbourhood level. So actually you need to have a ground up way of listening to what's actually on the ground, and we need to make that absolutely systemic in terms of how that sort of scales, in terms of that listening ear to be able to capture those sort of ideas. We've just done a piece of work of 540 GP practices across Greater Manchester. How does digital, how is it enabling and supporting people on the ground? What we're finding is through COVID that technology has been deployed. Some GPs are flying with it. Some people are switching the digital front door off because they're dealing with capacity. And when you get the groups together, and we got 50 practices together in a very sort of engaged, co-created design thinking session, then a lot of the challenges are pretty sort of similar across the piece. So it's about how you get that sort of fabric of the infrastructure that's got the listening voice on the ground, but also an ability then to translate that into actually there's lots of commonality around how you deliver solutions around them. I think social media, I think, is something that we need to spend a lot more time thinking around it. There's lots of security issues. That's why people, avoid using social media. But the power of social media in terms of building connectivity and community is really important. And I think that is really untapped at the moment. And we definitely need to spend a lot more time in that space.
I don't want to over gild the lily, but I would observe that if integrated care systems are there to do anything, it should be creating the environment through which scaled solutions, innovation and research are taken on a journey through to implementation and scale and spread. I think one of the casualties of the previous reforms has been complexity and competition. As a chief executive of a clinical commissioning group, too often I think we spent most of our time drafting clinical pathways that would be routed through a contractual route rather than a co-produced set of solutions which existed prior to the kind of 2013 reform. So I think integrated care systems have a fundamental role in driving that mentality. And I think you'll be surprising not to see a garage mentality in every ICS across the country, where groups of clinicians and people and service users come together to co-produce and design a solution, be they a primary care network with local service users or a group of orthopods coming together across the patch. So I think garage mentality now needs to pervade across integrated care systems. Thank you.
Any questions from the group? In person?
Hi, Matt Rule from Toka.io. Just so you know, if my question's a little bit biased, we do no code apps. And so question for Richard. You're not going, are you? Good. So I was really positive about what you were saying about design thinking, and playing it against what you were saying, Guy. It's about the human, it's about the people that are using the tech. And I couldn't agree more with hidden technology and invisible tech. But what I see when we're selling to trusts and we're selling to CIOs and CDIOs is there's still, they didn't want to take risks. And there's a horrible expression about buying IBM, and I'm quite a fan of IBM, actually, if they're listening in. But you do get that mentality. So how, in your position in NHSX, NHSX have done a fantastic job. How are you going to scale that? How are you going to scale that across all the different trusts?
Thank you. So I think, and thank you for your kind words. Again, I know we're going through some transformation now into the future, but I think we're genuinely keen to retain that kind of spirit of support and encouragement. Clearly we've got a number of resources like the digital playbooks and the innovation blueprinting that we've been doing that help people dip in and understand that actually what might be perceived as risks actually aren't risks, as there's a pathway to implementation and solution which has got real dividends and benefits. I think we want to break out of the kind of short-termist cycle that we've observed. In terms of for someone like Guy to be able to get funding, it's probably almost felt like, rather than a strategic journey, it's been an opportunistic journey to hook sources and apps of funding in a bit of a cycle. And I think increasingly we want to move into a much cleaner, clearer cycle of the funding follows the strategic ambitions of the system. And therefore every system will know what the big challenges it needs to face and where the next pound of investment into digital solutions will go, based on a really coherent and strategic planning cycle hooked into what's the core business we want to deliver on. So I think that moves us from a kind of a just-in-time, heavens, I've suddenly got an opportunity to bid for money, to I know what my plan is, I know what my strategy is, and therefore I want to leverage investment when it comes forward. I don't think it bypasses that need to, and this is, there'll be CIOs online and in the room, and that, that no means diminishes the role of the CIO and the CCIO in their leadership role, but understanding the breadth of stakeholders who need to be advocating for a solution is really key. It might be the senior partner in general practice. It may well be the clinical, the specialty clinical director, or it may well be, the ICS chief executive. But understanding the post-22 leadership structures in the NHS is now going to be, I think, required reading for tech suppliers to understand what is going to be quite significant changes in the dynamic of how decisions are taken and money flows. Thank you.
Any other questions from the group?
Sorry, you've got to go. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Any other questions from the group? No? I think that's the set time, right?
Thank you.